AYANEO is kicking the year off with one of their more ambitious devices with the AYANEO Slide. The Sidekick-inspired, spring-loaded screen reveals a tactile keyboard underneath. A feature that can sometimes feel superfluous when you're just playing games, but always brings relief whenever you do in fact need to type something in. But right off the bat, I noticed a baffling omission. Despite the retro mobile inspiration, the Slide did decide to take one innovation from modern phones when AYANEO decided to remove the headphone jack entirely. For many, this is going to be a small gripe that is meaningless to their overall enjoyment. But to some, this is a critical missing piece, so I figured it was important to state that up front. Outside of that, the AYANEO Slide promises a unique handheld gaming PC experience that aims to give you, the player, full-fledged controls and, for the first time in an AYANEO device, a keyboard. So in this review, I want to explore a few things. Is the keyboard significantly helpful on a Windows handheld? Is this a well-built mechanism for sliding the screen up and down? How does this shell, which is actually new for AYANEO, hold up in terms of ergonomics and heat dissipation? And of course, what am I supposed to do without an audio jack? Okay, I'm kidding about that last one, but before we continue, let me give you my disclosure. AYANEO has sent me this device for free, but in addition to that, they are now partnering with GullyKit, so AYANEO has also sent me a King Kong 3 Max controller and their new SNES-inspired docking station. That said, no money has changed hands, and AYANEO is not getting a chance to see this review ahead of time. My reviews are always impartial, and I aim to be thorough enough to help you form your own opinion, which may absolutely differ from my own. Alright, if you're looking to pick one of these up, you can go through the Indiegogo. Unfortunately, due to some family matters, I wasn't able to make the initial launch of January 4th, but I'll include up-to-date prices on screen now. As of writing, the campaign still has the $699 early bird option for the model with 16GB of RAM and 512GB of storage. That is a great value for a 7840U device. There are 4 model options that only differ in terms of RAM and storage, with the highest offering 64GB of RAM and 4TB of storage. Each model has a sliding price scale depending on when you order. I'm not going to go into all of the various accessories, but I do want to point out that there's a TomTalk Slim case with the retro stripe motif. I am generally a fan of TomTalk's offerings, including their Steam Deck Slim cases, and this design looks really nice. One last note with AYANEO is that, like many other boutique PC manufacturers, these machines are typically shipped directly out of a single country. This could pose a problem if you have to get your device serviced and are forced to ship to China and back to you. Moving on to the packaging and what comes with the AYANEO Slide, the box for this machine carries the retro stripe motif as well. If you're fine wine age like I am, then you'll immediately recognize this as some sort of VHS box, but you may be unable to place which VHS box specifically. Well, for no good reason at all, I googled a bunch of VHS boxes and found that this design belongs to the Sony T120 series, down to the little AYANEO logo matching the Sony design. At the risk of exposing how fun I am at parties, I've got to point out that although this design is extremely fun, it's a design language that is completely inconsistent with the inspiration for the machine itself. The Slide is part of AYANEO's larger retro tech inspired line of products, with the Slide of course being inspired by T-Mobile Sidekicks and more generally slide phones that were popular in the late aughts, and not the VHS tapes that had been dead for basically 10 years. So yeah, make sure to subscribe for more critical analysis of game tech packaging. Anyway, you might not be surprised to learn that a compartment slides out of this box just like a VHS tape from its... Wait, VHS tapes slide out? Slide phones have screens that slide out? AYANEO, you slide dogs. I see the connection now. Once you slide it out, the packaging looks very similar to other AYANEO devices. It's split into compartments, one with the actual handheld, and then the other with the accessories that come in 3 boxes. There's a USB-C charger with collapsible prongs, a 5-foot USB-C cable, and various adapters so that you can use this power brick no matter where in the world you are. As for the device itself, it weighs in at 660 grams, which makes it closer to the Steam Deck LCD than the Steam Deck OLED model. The weight is decently balanced, but I wouldn't call it light. It feels dense. Likewise, as far as dimensions go, this is a small yet thick boy. I was a little surprised by the thickness. I wouldn't say it's a bad thing, but I want to say that it makes the grips less pronounced. The colorway I have here is called Sunrise White. There's also a bright black on sale. This version has a bright white shell with saturated orange accents. The plastic is extremely smooth, though I wouldn't call it slippery. On the top of the AYANEO Slide, we have a power button with a fingerprint sensor, volume rocker, power LED, and a USB 4 port. On the bottom, we have the dual speakers, a micro SD card slot, and another USB 4 port. Absolutely conspicuous by its absence is the lack of a headphone jack anywhere on here. And what I can't show you, of course, is the LPDDR5X RAM, Wi-Fi 6E, Bluetooth 5.2, built-in gyro, and a 46.2 watt-hour battery. The interesting thing on this device, of course, is the slidable screen. The screen itself is 1080p, 6 inches, 60 Hz IPS portrait display. Peak brightness is 400 nits, which is less than the 500 nits I'm used to seeing on other handhelds. Like any other candy bar handheld, the screen sits in between the controls, but on this machine, it can slide up via a spring mechanism. I tend to open it with both thumbs. You can open it with a single thumb, but it would definitely have to be as close to the center as possible. The spring seems to work as intended, but it's hard to say how much opening and closing it can actually withstand over a long period of time. As it is, it snaps open after pushing 25 to 30% of the way up, and snaps closed after pushing down the same distance. The snapping motion does not pass the partner in bed test, meaning that the sound of the screen either snapping open or snapping closed is pretty loud if you're in bed and not trying to disturb your partner. Having a screen that slides up is a considerable benefit, ergonomically speaking, because it reduces the amount you have to either lift the device up or bend your neck down. In addition, the AYANEO Slide has a trick up its sleeve that makes that benefit even more pronounced. It can tilt up to 30 degrees forward. Of course, that means another moving part that I have to hope will age well after a couple of years of use, but it's a nice feature nonetheless, and I found that even though I rarely actually used the keyboard, I tended to slide the screen up often because it was just a more comfortable position to play in. And here are some side-by-sides with the ROG Ally so you can get an idea of the picture quality of this one. With that though, it's time to talk about the keyboard and the controls as well. The keys here are completely flush with the case itself, but there's enough space in between the keys that I don't really encounter any issues typing. These are, of course, really small keys, and it's not going to be a productivity replacement, at least not for me, but it is a good keyboard to use for Discord, searching your game library in Steam, and maybe even some light typing games like Typing of the Dead or TIS 100. On a Windows-based handheld, I found the keyboard to be a nice addition, but it falls short of being a game changer for me. Moving on to the gaming controls, these are Hall Effect analog sticks as well as Hall triggers. If you don't know, the Hall Effect bullet point is not just for marketing, it is actually helpful to improve accuracy, reduce dead zones, and improve longevity. The triggers feel a little hollow for my taste. I tend to like a pull that's a bit more pronounced, but if you want a light pull, this might be for you. The size of all the controls on here are smaller and more in line with the Switch controls. But my biggest annoyance is the way the controls are stacked directly above each other. Specifically, the face button sitting right above the right analog stick can be a little annoying. The dual speakers are down-firing and they do leave a bit to be desired. That is once again made all the more annoying without a 3.5 headphone jack. That leaves wireless earbuds as my preferred way to listen to the games I'm playing on my device. Thankfully, the Slide does have the latest Bluetooth 5.2, so I'm dealing with as little latency as possible on that end. Moving on to performance, the AYANEO Slide sports the 7840U, which we've seen in virtually every handheld by now. As a result, there are not a lot of surprises here. It can go as low as 5 watts, and in this handheld, it can go as high as 28. 18 watts is the sweet spot, and above 25 watts, you begin to get diminishing returns. Here are some benchmarks I ran and how they compare to the ROG Ally at 720p. You can see that at 18 watts, it generally handles my benchmark tests better than the ROG Ally. At an 18 watt TDP, the Slide was drawing over 36 to 38 watts of total system power. Based on my handheld testing, this does seem to be at the high end of power draw for 18 watts. With a 46.2 watt-hour battery, that means you're going to get a little over 70 minutes of battery life. If you were to do the max of 28 watts, you wouldn't even get an hour of battery life. Even at this wattage, the device never got hot to the touch. You can feel it warm up, especially towards the center of the keyboard, but it seemed well cooled overall. When I played much less demanding games like Dead Cells or Hades, I could force a lower TDP like 8 watts. I couldn't get lower than 8 watts and keep a consistent frame rate. At that TDP, the Slide draws about 18 watts of total system power. That means about 2.5 hours of battery life for games like Dead Cells, Hades, and Celeste. When it comes to dealing with Windows, each of the handheld manufacturers have their own software. AYANEO has ISpace 2. On an AYANEO device, you can move the cursor with the left analog stick and use the face buttons to left or right click. ISpace has options for setting the TDP limit, which can be anywhere from 5 to 28 watts, or toggling smart TDP, which will do the controlling for you, and the option to enable a performance overlay. In this quick access control panel, you can also set the brightness, volume, and toggle various things like Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. With regard to gyro, AYANEO has gone back to the drawing board and they're calling their new gyro implementation Motion EX. Motion EX requires 2 third-party installs that you have to do by yourself. With these installs, Motion EX can trick Windows into thinking the built-in controller is actually a PlayStation DualShock. Overall, I'd say that this area still needs work and this feels like it's in beta. Steam still thinks I have an Xbox controller plugged in, and having to install multiple pieces of third-party software makes the process a little more cumbersome than I'd personally like. It's time for me to tell you about my pros and cons for this device. Starting with the things I like, the first thing is the slidable and tiltable screen. The display itself could stand to be better considering it peaks at 60 Hz and 400 nits brightness, but the fact that the screen is slidable and tiltable just provided a more comfortable playing experience overall. One feature that would take this to the next level is if it could rotate too. That would make it great for playing vertical games like Downwell and Ikaruga. The next thing I liked about the Slide is the keyboard. As I said earlier, I didn't find it to be a game changer, but it was very much a nice to have. It was a nice addition for playing some light keyboard based games like Typing of the Dead, and it even made it comfortable to use Discord. Moving on to my dislikes, I think, like I just got finished saying, the screen does leave quite a bit to be desired. Between the fact that it's 60 Hz, portrait, and 400 nits, I do wish AYANEO could have chosen a more modern display, especially considering this isn't a budget handheld by any means. Likewise, I think the audio experience leaves me wanting. I wish the speakers were better, there's no headphone jack, and as an aside, the sliding mechanism is quite loud. If you use wireless audio, most of that should not be a problem for you, but it's certainly something to be aware of. The AYANEO Slide is a unique handheld, which is something that I'm happy to see more of in 2024. Many of us joke about how many handhelds AYANEO tends to release, and part of me feels like this is the form factor that AYANEO should continue to iterate on. The flagship model is a little too similar to everything else. The flip format is something that GPD has virtually perfected, and the other models feel a bit superfluous. The Slide as a form factor has a lot of potential. I have a small list of things that I'd want them to address, like making the controls a little more offset rather than vertically stacked, and having a better screen and speakers. But if they can address those things, I can picture the Slide becoming AYANEO's new flagship. I hope you've enjoyed this review. Consider leaving a like and a subscribe if you want to see more. Goodbye!